Welcome back to Health and Wellness. This is Dr. Carmen. This week we are doing nutrition. The nutrition chapter is actually pretty long, so we're going to divide it into 2 weeks. So that's why you'll be seeing nutrition this week and next week. Whenever I think about nutrition, I kind of rank it with first is sleep in regards to health. Second would be nutrition, and then finally would be exercise. One of my favorite sayings is still, you can't out-exercise a bad diet. And I could spend weeks talking about nutrition, but because this is a health and wellness class, we don't have that much time, so it's more of an overview. I'm kind of trying to give you what I think are the most important concepts, things I want you to take home, things I want you to remember about, proteins, carbs, fats, water. But if you really enjoy this, then I would definitely recommend taking a nutrition class. There's so much to learn. And there's some fantastic books on nutrition. All right, so let's get started. So one of the first things I wanted to differentiate is the difference between hunger and appetite. Surprisingly, a lot of people don't know the difference. So let's go over the definitions. Hunger is the actual impulse to seek, the physiological impulse to seek food prompted by the lack or shortage of basic foods needed to provide the energy and nutrients that support health. Appetite, on the other hand, is the desire to eat. Normally accompanies hunger, but is more psychological than physiological. So, why do you think most people eat? Do you think it's hunger-based or appetite-based? I would say it's about 99% appetite-based. And, I had you guys read some articles on intermittent fasting, and one thing about intermittent fasting is that it teaches you hunger. Okay, and that's one of the benefits. For a long time, I always ate when I woke up because I've got to eat when it's breakfast. That was appetite-based. I wasn't always hungry. Okay, we eat for so many reasons that have nothing to do with hunger. True hunger is the reason we should eat, but we eat because we're happy. We eat because we're sad. We eat when we're with friends. We eat when we celebrate. Think about when you were growing up. I remember I was growing up. Whenever there was a baseball game, after whoever team won, we'd go get ice cream. So we use food as a reward. Sometimes parents will actually punish their kids. They'll say, "Oh, you've been bad. You don't get dinner." So we get all these weird associations with food, and most of those are based around appetite. On the other hand, true hunger is something that a lot of us have lost the ability to even have, that we just eat by the clock all day long. As I've mentioned in prior lectures, learning mindfulness eating, being able to feel the hunger and saying, "Oh, I'm not going to perish right now." That was one of the cool things I learned from doing, why I do intermittent fasting, is that every once in a while, I got hunger pains for a couple weeks when I first started, and now I can go, wake up in the morning, not eat until 12:31, have a full workout, and I feel fine. If anything, I feel better than I usually do. I don't feel tired or anything until after I eat. And to me, that was, pretty valuable, because most of my life, I've always said breakfast is the most important meal. You got to eat every 3 hours. And now some of the research is finding that may not be accurate. All right. And we should really listen to our hunger, not our appetite. So please know the difference between those two for future quiz and homework too. Nutrients are the constituents of food that sustain humans physiologically. These include proteins, carbs, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. And usually they divide nutrients into macronutrients and micronutrients. So macro just means large amounts. So, for example, proteins, carbs, and fats, and I would even say water would be considered macronutrients. Vitamins and minerals, because we need smaller and even trace amounts, would be considered micronutrients. Nutrition is the science that investigates the relationship between physiological function and the essential elements of the food eaten. There used to be a diet, or actually there still is a diet. If you Google the diet, it's called If It Fits Your Macros diet. And so a lot of young, you get a lot of these young bodybuilder guys especially, and they figure out how many calories they need. And then they figure out how many proteins. So then they say I need 2,000 calories. So then they basically say, okay, well, I want to get out of those 2,000 calories, I want to get 200 grams of protein, 200 grams of carb, which would be 800, so that's 1,600. And then, I want to get 50 grams of fat. And so the If It Fits Your Macros diet, it's based on calories, but it's also based on the macronutrients. But really interesting, they don't care what the source of the macronutrients is. So they could eat fast food as long as it fits their macros. And so these guys can get really insanely lean doing this diet, the If It Fits Your Macros diet. And so they look at me, I've got a six-pack, I'm healthy. But my question, and there was actually a researcher who did this a couple of years ago. He lost a bunch of weight, and all he ate was Twinkies. So it is possible to lose weight based on calories, but I don't care about that, okay? Because weight loss is one aspect of health, but how do you feel? I can't imagine how I would feel if I just ate Twinkies every day, okay? As I've told you in this class repeatedly, I'm more about function. I don't want to eat foods that are going to create inflammation. So if I'm eating fast food every day, then I'm probably going to have a lot of arthritic pain, acne. If you ever saw the movie Super Size Me, loss of libido, depression. If I eat like that, I might look good, because it's under my calories, but feeling-wise, I'm probably going to feel horrible. So, if you see a diet like that, just think about, it's not just the calories, okay? It's also what the foods do in the body in regards to detoxification, the types of fats, hormones. It's actually pretty complex, and we're going to talk about some simple ways to make it easier. So this is a good slide. Why should I care? And I think about this a lot when I'm teaching this class, either online or on ground. How do I get you guys, the average college student, and I'm saying the average, there's obviously people, the average college student is 18 to 25 years old. So you're at the point in your life where you have the best metabolism. And what I mean is you can pretty much eat anything and everything, and it doesn't really make you fat. Maybe you don't even get that tired. You probably get a little acne. But other than that, how do I get you to believe when you've got this great metabolism, you're eating pretty much, the standard American diet, SAD, and you feel fine? So how do I get you to believe that if you keep eating like this, you're going to get diabetes, you're going to get heart disease, hypertension, stroke, cancer? When you feel invincible, it's really challenging to say, okay, well, maybe you should make better choices. I started making better choices when I was, ironically, like my parents didn't know a lot about nutrition. They were about average. But I was about 12 when I started reading Muscle and Fitness. And I was like, I started reading these articles and I wanted to get more muscle. And so they were the first education I had about eating better. I started eating protein shakes and I saw Rocky the movie. And I used to do raw eggs, which before, now if a kid ate raw eggs, you'd be like child abuse. But back then I would put 6 eggs in a glass and just swallow them down. They weren't even organic. But that was the beginning of my nutrition adventure. And, up to this day, I'm always playing with my diet, tweaking it. And, I don't ever want people to think I eat 100% clean, because I don't. I don't think that's, realistic. I try to eat about the 80-20 rule, sometimes 90-10, where 80% of my meals are very good. Lots of non-starchy vegetables, good source of protein, good source of fat. I make a lot of smoothies. We're going to talk about smoothies in a couple weeks. But then I also, I don't think your diet should dictate how other people cook, and also being social. Remember we talked about the different aspects of health. I shouldn't be sacrificing my physical health. So say I'm eating great, but then I never can go out and talk to anybody. So I sacrifice my social health for my diet. I think that's not balanced. So I definitely, drink a beer. I love pizza. I try not to eat pizza every day, obviously. And so that's where I am in the middle. I don't want to be obsessive about this. And I know a lot of you guys can relate to that. But back to this question, why should you care? I think that one of the big reasons you care is because food is really good at giving an instant feedback. And what I mean is, if I was to have you eat 3 pieces of toast for breakfast, within a couple hours, okay, you would either be craving more bread or you would be getting sleepy. And then if on another day I was to have you have like eggs, make eggs and like an omelet with vegetables, a little bit of cheese and eggs, no carbs, or maybe a little bit of orange, not orange juice, like half an orange, you'd be surprised how much better you would feel. And so one of the reasons I think you should care is because food has such a quick feedback, in regards to function, that if you don't feel great, look at your diet. Now, the other motivator for a lot of people, and this is one, think about, why do most people go to the gym? Why do most people get healthy? Is it because they're trying to prevent diabetes? No, most people want to get healthy because they want to look better. All right. And so I can tell you, like food, there's a direct relationship. It's funny. Most dermatologists would disagree. Well, some of them are coming around. But if you eat really bad fats, like you eat tons of, lousy pizza, like Little Caesars or something like that, drink a lot of milk, you're under a lot of stress. Those are all linked, with acne. Okay. They're also linked with inflammation. So a lot of people want to look better. So not only they want a six-pack, they don't want to break out. So if that's what gets you to the gym, I don't care. That's great. Okay, whatever makes you, eventually get to the gym or eat healthy, I'm okay with. All right. So if your whole reason for eating better and going to the gym is because you want to look better so you can get a better looking spouse or mate, there's nothing wrong with that, because what happens over time, guys, is that, yes, you start with this, goal of looking good, but also you start to get the other benefits of exercising and eating better, which include better sleep, lower stress, less inflammation, feeling just good in general. And so that will eventually, for a lot of people, that's enough to keep them doing it. Ask anybody who exercises consistently, and they'll usually tell you they feel pretty good. They feel really good, actually. Okay? Remember what I was telling you in another lecture? Exercise is like a natural antidepressant, and choosing not to exercise is like taking a depressant pill. You never forget that. All right, in your book, it talks a little bit about a couple terms: the recommended dietary allowance, the adequate intake, tolerable upper intake level, and acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. What I want to focus on is this first one, the RDA. So as this PowerPoint says, the reference standard for intake levels necessary to meet the nutritional needs of 97 to 98% of healthy individuals. The RDAs are developed by the government. You'll see them all the time on anything you buy on the label. And realize that the RDAs are not designed to make you optimally healthy. What they're designed to do is to basically make you not sick. Remember we did that, the wellness spectrum, the first week of class, and I said, most people define themselves as not sick. That's what the RDAs are. Okay? I'll give you an example. Vitamin C. The RDA for vitamin C is 70 to 90 milligrams per day. Not a lot. When I was in graduate school, there was a guy, his name was Linus Pauling, C. Linus Pauling, and he was a big researcher, brilliant man, and he got onto vitamin C when he was in his 70s. And he believed vitamin C was one of the most important things we could put in our bodies. And he used to do 10 grams a day of vitamin C. He lived to be in his 90s. He was a Nobel laureate. I mean, an impressive man. lived way into his 90s, and he said, vitamin C would help, with collagen, help you not get sick. Well, 10 grams is equivalent to 10,000 milligrams. Remember what I said? The government recommends 70 to 90 milligrams. So I did an experiment for a whole year in school. I said, okay, I'm going to try this. And I was only doing 5 grams, which is 5,000 milligrams. So I did half of what Linus Pauling was doing, but it still was a lot. And I did that for a year. And you know what happened? I didn't get sick. All right. Basically, for a whole year, I never got a cold. Vitamin C is interesting if you take too much. If you get up to 10,000 and you're not used to it, you'll just get a little diarrhea. Then you just back off a little bit. But it's relatively safe. It's a water-soluble vitamin. So the RDAs, I want you to understand that when you see these, they're designed. So the RDA for vitamin C is 60, 70 to 90 milligrams. If you get that minimum, you won't get scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency disease. It's not about optimal health and not getting sick. It's just not getting scurvy. I don't care so much about the other ones that you know them definition-wise. All right, a kilocalorie, we know it as a calorie, is a unit of measurement to quantify the energy in food. This is typically done in a lab. Most nutrition labels use the word calorie. Energy is the capacity to do work. And then energy-containing nutrients are proteins, carbs, and fats. And really, the order that we burn those is more like carbs, then fat. And then if we're in a jam, we will burn protein, but we don't like to burn protein for energy. That's, that would be burning our muscle mass. Okay, and so you'll see people who burn muscle mass if they're starving. I'll often notice it in people with eating disorders. If you Google, bulimia or anorexia, you'll see some people who've been starving themselves for so long that they actually eat up the muscle mass around their facial muscles. And so you'll see they look so starved, even though they no longer have an eating disorder, because once you eat up muscle mass, it's very hard to get it back, especially in some place like your face. All right, the digestive process. I thought I'd review this. It's good, just if you're not familiar. The digestive process, and this is actually a question on your homework, actually starts not in your mouth, but starts in your brain. And what I mean is that, if you start thinking about food, that automatically starts to stimulate secretion of enzymes. Even your stomach can start gurgling. If I was to tell you to picture you're sucking on a lemon right now, you would some people actually start salivating. So I would say that the digestive process first starts in the brain. Sometimes it starts with one sense, like the sense of smell. You smell something and all of a sudden you weren't hungry and you're hungry. Then it goes to the mouth, all right? And so when the food gets in your mouth, we have these salivary glands. We have 3 sets of salivary glands, and they secrete saliva, and saliva basically lubricates the food as you chew. And most people aren't aware, but your tongue is actually mashing that food along the top of your mouth, which is called your hard palate. The top of your mouth, if you feel it, is a hard palate, and that's part of your cranium or your skull. And as you move backwards, it becomes the soft palate, and that's the little uvula. That's the part of people touch, they feel like they're gagging. Once the food gets mashed up, the tongue actually forms the food into a ball, almost like a ball of food, and they call it a bolus. And this ball of food goes from the mouth to the back of the mouth, they call it the oropharynx, into this long muscular tube called the esophagus. The esophagus, I believe, is like about 10 inches long. Okay, it's posterior to the trachea. And the esophagus brings food down, and then it goes through the diaphragm. And at the diaphragm, it meets the stomach. And they call that the lower esophageal sphincter. And it's not a true sphincter. A sphincter is a circular muscle. It's more of a sphincter because the diaphragm surrounds it. But that sphincter leads to the stomach. Here's the stomach. And the stomach is full of stomach acid. Now, the problem is that a lot of what we do these days weakens that sphincter. So a lot of people will eat something, and then all of a sudden some of this acid gets pushed back into the esophagus, and they call that reflux. And the disorder is called GERD, G-E-R-D, or gastroesophageal reflux disorder. You might say, why do I care? Because if you're getting that, if you're getting a lot of heartburn, you've got a reflux, if you're always clearing your throat, you could have GERD. And this constant spitting out of acid on the esophagus day after day, what happens is the esophageal tissue gets burnt, then it has to regrow, then it gets burnt again. And when you keep damaging a tissue and it has to regrow, damage, regrow, it puts it at a higher risk for certain types of cancer. Because cancer is all about growth of cells. And so where I've got a tissue that keeps growing, there's a chance that the growing process can be affected. And that's what cancer is. It's uncontrolled growth. And so the fastest growing cancer in the United States is esophageal cancer. And so, what weakens the lower esophageal sphincter? Coffee, okay, high sugar foods, high fatty foods, lying down after you eat, being overweight. Those are all things that put you at a higher risk for GERD. I had a patient once who had GERD, and what she did is she put blocks under the head of her bed, so she slept on a slant, and she stopped eating every night after 7 o'clock. And those two things, her GERD went away, but she also lost like 30 pounds in a month and a half. It was amazing. And then when she lost the weight, her GERD went away. Okay, so the food goes from the esophagus down to the stomach. The stomach has 3 walls, 3 layers. The stomach is full of acid. It also has this stuff called intrinsic factor, which helps you absorb B12. What do you think the function of the acid in the stomach is for? Well, the stomach, it's got 2 big functions. One, it helps you break down proteins. So carbs and fats aren't really broken down in the stomach. Okay, they're broken down in the small intestine. But, and carbs are also broken down a little bit in the mouth. Your mouth has this stuff called amylase in the saliva, so carbs are broken down. There's a little bit of fat enzyme too. But they're mostly broken down in the small intestine. Proteins start getting broken down in the stomach. Okay, so the acid is number 1 is for that. But the number 2 reason that we have this acid is because everything we eat, like this girl in this picture is eating, is filthy. And what I mean by that is it's covered by bacteria. And this bacteria wants to get in our body, so it goes down our mouth because it's in all our food. No matter how clean you think your food is, it's covered in bacteria. Once it gets in the stomach, though, it gets boiled in this jug of acid. So our stomach is continuously killing bacteria. So when you're sleeping, most of us sleep, we sleep and we breathe, especially sleep with your mouth open. Bacteria and dust mites are getting down our throat. But the reason we're not waking up and getting sick is because they get into our stomach and they just basically boil in acid. Your stomach leads to your small intestine, this long tube here. Your small intestine is about 20 feet long. It's very long. It's designed for absorption. That's why it's so long. This is where we break down the rest of our proteins. We break down our carbs and our fats. And when I say break them down, we break them down. So a protein into amino acids, a carbohydrate down eventually into glucose, which is our body's sugar. Okay, it's a monosaccharide. And then our fats, our triglycerides, are broken down into glycerol. Okay, are basically broken down into glycerol backbones and fat. So 3 fat molecules in a glycerol. So that's, so once that's done, then what do we have left? Once it goes these 20 feet, it goes to the right here. This little area is where the appendix is. And then it goes in the colon. And your colon's job is to make fecal matter. This is where we have a ton of good bacteria. We have some in our small intestine too. So we make fecal matter, and we also reabsorb water out of our colon. So our colon goes up our right side, ascending colon, across, transverse colon, down, descending, and then our sigmoid colon, rectum and anus. Now, besides all the organs I listed, when you're thinking of the digestive system, it's basically a tube. Okay, I remember when I first learned of it when I was very young, they used to call it the alimentary canal. And if you were a cartoon, they could literally put a pole in your mouth, and the pole could go through the whole tube and then pop out your anus. Okay, and that's as a cartoon. Obviously, you can't do it as a person. But why I tell you that is because this tube is like a barrier to the outside world, meaning that there's all kinds of bacteria, fecal bacteria, feces in here, undigested food. We don't want this in the rest of our body until it's broken down small enough. So when something happens where one of these gets ruptured, so for example, appendicitis or diverticulitis, but see your appendix here and this explodes, now fecal matter, and more importantly, fecal bacteria, can go from in this tube to the whole body. And so this is why everyone is always worried about appendicitis, because if you have this bacteria in here, all of a sudden I go from not giving me a problem because it's contained in the tube to in the blood, and now it can thrive and cause a blood infection, which they call septicemia, which is deadly. A couple of the accessory organs in the digestive system, they consider your teeth an accessory organ. Your liver, which secretes this stuff called bile. Bile helps break down fats. Bile is made in the liver. It also liver obviously detoxifies. And then it's stored in this little green thing called the gallbladder. And the gallbladder squirts out bile every time the stomach shoots out food. And the bile helps break down fats. The pancreas, which you can't see, is also a big digestive organ. Actually, it's right there, that little yellow thing. It's actually bigger than that. You can see it here. It's the light yellow. Always looks like corn. Pancreas secretes tons of digestive enzymes for all carbs, proteins, and fat. So the pancreas actually doesn't just secrete insulin, it also secretes digestive enzymes. All right, so let's talk about water. So water, how long can you go out without food? Well, this is interesting. I always used to say a couple months, maybe. When I was in school, I knew a couple people who went to they did water fast for a month for health reasons. So all they drank was water. And it's amazing. It cost a couple $1,000s to go to this clinic and fast. But the whole thing was if you allow your body to just focus on not digesting food, it could heal other things. That was the philosophy. So I thought it used to be a month, but just last year, there was actually a gentleman who was obese. He fasted. He didn't eat at all except for water for it was like 360 days or 380 days, and didn't die. And actually now he's at a regular body weight. I think he's eating again, but he feels fine. So we can fast a long time if we have a lot of body fat. But water, how long can you go without water? Usually only about 3 to 4 days. Okay? 3 to 4 days. So, dehydration is a big problem for a lot of people. A lot of people don't get enough water. All right? Now, if you get too much water, it can cause this thing called hyponatremia, which means low blood sodium, or low body sodium, I guess, which can cause a problem. And our body's made up of 50 to 70% water. Now, a couple years ago, not too long ago, the radio shows, who watches the radio these days, they used to have this challenge where they would ask somebody to drink a gallon of water or a gallon of milk in an hour. And they would do this challenge, and then somebody dropped dead. And they're like, how's that possible? Well, if you drink water too fast, and milk is basically water with sugar in it, what happens is it dilutes the electrolytes in your heart, but also in your brain. And so what happened with this kid is that, when you need these electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. These are what basically regulate your heart rate. And so when you dilute them, your body thinks you don't have enough. And so it can cause all kinds of things like heart issues, okay, problems with thinking. So that's a sign of too much water. On the flip side is dehydration. And this is something I do want you to know. What are some signs of dehydration? So really interesting. Well, everybody, thinks thirsty, I'm dehydrated. And there's some thought, but by the time you're thirsty, you're probably already dehydrated. Okay, you're probably already dehydrated. And so thirst is definitely a symptom, but some of the other symptoms that are, you might know or might not know, dark urine. Your urine should be nice and clear or light. Hunger. A lot of times people are hungry. One of the best things for people trying to lose weight or even get their hydration in is drink a glass of water before every meal. And the reason you do this is two reasons. Number one, if you're actually not hungry, you could be thirsty. It quenches your thirst. Number two, it's 0 calorie and it fills your stomach a little bit. So you often don't have to eat as much. Now, there is some debate on that. Some people believe that if you drink water before your meals, you'll dilute your stomach acid. I feel like if you have stomach acid issues, that might be a problem, but most people I know can drink water and eat, and they're fine. Other signs of dehydration, headaches. Okay, your blood volume, once you start getting dehydrated, your body says, where can I get water? It takes it out of your blood, so you have less blood volume, less plasma going to your brain. Your blood is what carries your oxygen, so you get a headache. Okay, constipation. All right, when I think about constipation, the first thing I think about when people are constipated is dehydrated, then lack of fiber. All right, then low thyroid. Other symptoms, joint pain. Okay, a lot of people don't realize that your joints are all made from collagen, okay, and hyaline cartilage, and these are very high water-containing tissues. So again, when you're continuously dehydrated, you have less cushioning between your joints. A couple other symptoms: low energy. Okay, loss of skin turgor. What that means is if you guys were to pinch your hand right now and then let it go, don't pinch yourself hard, the skin should rebound and be flat. When someone has loss of skin turgor, they'll actually pinch their hand and the skin will stay pinched. It's really weird. Okay, that's a sign of dehydration. So how much water should you drink? This is also a good quiz question. My favorite recommendation through the years, they used to say 8 glasses, but it doesn't make sense because, I weigh 190, right? And there are people in this class who probably weigh 100 pounds. Should we both be drinking 8 glasses of water? Probably not, okay? And then activity also factors in. But ideally, you should drink half of your body weight in ounces, okay? So if you weigh 200 pounds, you should drink about 100 ounces of water, all right? And so that is 10 times 8 is 80, 11, 88, 12. It's roughly 12 and a half glasses of water a day. I don't drink 12 glasses of water. That's a lot of water. So what you want to remember is that even though the recommendation is half your body weight in ounces in water, remember that water is also in a lot of foods. So for example, fruits and vegetables are 80 to 95% water. Meats are more than 50% water. Pasta is probably, because you boil it, is probably 60, 70% water. Okay? Tea, soup, broths, those are all considered water. Now, caffeine, people used to say don't include caffeine. Caffeine is a diuretic, so you can include the water in caffeine, but you also have to factor in if it's making you urinate every hour, you probably have to drink a little bit more. But that recommendation, 1/2 your body weight in ounces, I feel like is pretty good for most people. And obviously, if you're physically active and sweating, you need to consume a lot more water. All right, estimated caloric needs. This also factors in sedentary and active. Just to give you an idea, this is really rough because it's not actually adding your weight. But, for people in this class, 19 to 25 females, they should be eating 2,000 calories, 2,400 if they're active. Males should be eating 2,400 to 2,800 to 3,000. Again, depends on the activity, depends on how much activity, all right? And if you're trying to lose weight, obviously you would eat a little bit less. If you love to eat, my biggest recommendation, if you love to eat, move more, okay? Remember Michael Phelps? There was a big article a few years ago, the big Olympic swimmer. He was eating, they said, estimated 12,000 calories a day. So look at this recommendation for, some people. That would be 6 times your daily amount of food. And he was lean. This guy had like a 6-pack. All right, so realize that, the recommendations, if you love to eat, just move more. All right, so now we're going to go to proteins. So next to water, proteins are the most abundant substances in the body. Remember that for the homework. Proteins are major components of nearly every cell and are called bodybuilders because of their role in developing and repairing bone, muscle, skin, and red blood cells. They are also key elements of antibodies. I always like to focus, everybody knows protein is good for muscle. Realize that protein is also really good for collagen. It's actually part of the bone matrix, so your skeleton. And the way I remember, what protein does is I used to have patients with protein deficiencies. So signs and symptoms of a protein deficiency, their hair would start to fall out. Their nails would get brittle. They would bruise really easily because their collagen wasn't being made correctly. And a lot of times they were sickly because we need protein to make things like antibodies. I once had these 2 vegan patients came in and they were always getting colds, and they said, we don't understand. Like, we are eating a vegan diet to be healthy. How come we're always sick? And what they found when I looked at their diet, I realized, you don't need to eat a ton of protein, but they weren't eating any protein. And so we had tweaked their diet to add in like a vegetarian protein source, and all of a sudden they weren't getting so sick. Okay. Protein deficiency also, you need amino acids to make neurotransmitters. So again, if you're not getting enough protein or breaking down the protein because you don't have good stomach acid, that could lead you to not have the things to make serotonin, which makes us feel happy. In regards to proteins, they're broken down into these little things called amino acids, and there are 20 total, but 9 of those 20 are called essential. And what that means is that the body can't make them. The other 11 can be produced in the body. When the body can't make them, that means it has to get them from the diet. Okay, it has to get them from the diet. The other 11, I can make the amino acids. The body can actually make them. So when we look at food sources, a complete protein is one that has all the essential amino acids. Okay, and so basically most animal sources of protein, including dairy, is considered complete. Plant sources of protein, though, are often incomplete and they lack a couple of amino acids. So this is one reason a lot of people say, vegetarian diets aren't good for you because they don't have complete proteins. Well, that's kind of ridiculous because if you look at this picture, all right, legumes or beans, all right, are incomplete, but all I got to do is add rice. You got to figure 50% of the world doesn't get to eat meat regularly. It's too expensive. All right. So what do they usually eat? Rice and beans. And they don't all have protein deficiencies. All right. Now, ironically, rice has like very, very little protein in it, but it's got enough amino acids to make beans a complete protein. I can add beans to nuts or almonds here, and they're complete. Spinach and rice and beans are now complete. So this is a couple ways to make a complete protein out of incomplete sources. So how much protein do you think you should eat? This is another good question for the homework. The government has the RDA is that basically your weight in kilograms times 0.8. Okay? So you would divide your weight by 2. If you don't how do I convert my weight to kilograms? Convert it by dividing your weight by 2.2. So if you're 200 pounds, roughly if I divide by 2, I'd weigh about 100 kilograms. A little bit less with the 2.2. And then I'd multiply 2.2 times 0.8. So for somebody who's 200 pounds, they should be eating around 80 grams of protein a day. 80 grams of protein a day. That's not a lot of protein for a 200-pound person. And think about it. If you weigh 100 pounds, okay, divided by 2.2 is roughly 50. All right, then multiply that 0.8. That's like 35 grams of protein, 40 grams of protein. That is almost nothing. That's like one chicken breast. So I remember what I told you guys. The government RDAs are to do what? Are they to make us optimally healthy, or are they prevent disease, keep us not sick? They are just to prevent us from not being sick. So I have through time seen that, I have friends who are bodybuilders who actually do 1 gram per pound of body weight, not kilogram. So they're doing, I have a friend who's 240 pounds. He's doing a minimum of 240 grams of protein a day. And sometimes he does 1.5 grams per pound. So he'll be doing 600 grams a day, which I think is probably too much. I found as I get older, and I don't think we need that much protein. I think like the PowerPoint said the average adult eats 100 grams of protein a day. I think that's what I just saw. Whoops. Yeah, average American consumes 100 grams of protein a day, twice the recommended daily amount. I think that it's somewhere in the middle there. So my recommendation from a health perspective is 0.7 or 0.8 times your weight in pounds. So it's a little bit over the 100 grams if you weigh 200 pounds. If you weigh 100 pounds, then you'd be getting about 80 grams. Okay. And again, this is, remember, there's no perfect diet. You've got to do it and see how it feels. My friend who's a bodybuilder, I tried doing that one summer. I tried eating, 150 grams of protein a day. I lasted like 3 days because I had to eat like 3 chicken breasts a day and a protein drink, and I was sick of chicken breast in like record time. It was just too much eating. Ugh, felt terrible. All right. A couple other functions of protein I want to list because it's interesting. Protein does, before we go into carbs, protein is, if you eat a protein with a carb, protein blunts the insulin response. And what that means, and we're going to talk about carbs in a second, is that every time you eat a carb, you secrete insulin, and insulin shuttles the carb to the cells. Well, we often secrete extra insulin, and so any excess carb gets stored as fat. One way to secrete less insulin is to eat a protein with a carb, so it blunts that response because a protein doesn't trigger the same amount of insulin as a carb does. The second cool thing about protein is that it's what's called thermogenic. Thermogenic basically means that we burn more calories eating protein than we do burning carbs or fats. So if I was to give you a bowl, an equal amount of a carb, a fat, and a protein, and have you eat each bowl and then measure your metabolism, you would actually burn more calories eating the protein than you would the carbs or fat. And so that's one of the reasons that, eating protein regularly is good for the metabolism. Too much protein, though, and there are pretty good research links that, eating too much, I'm not a vegetarian, but I do think that if you're eating tons and tons of meat, it probably does put you at a slightly higher risk for certain types of cancer, depending on the source of meat. Grass-fed beef is very different than standard beef with all the hormones and antibiotics. All right. Last topic we're going to cover in this section is carbs. And who doesn't love carbs? Just checking the time. So carbs, everyone, if I said, what's the function of carb? Everyone would say energy. And I actually ask you this, and I know some of you guys are going to debate this, but the reality, guys, is yes, carbs are a good source of energy, but we actually don't need. They're not necessary for health. Carbs are not necessary for health. And why I say that is because the last few years, thousands of people are now doing what are called ketogenic diets. And these diets are basically 5% of their diet is carbohydrates, 15% is protein, 85% is fat. 80% is fat. They're running, it turns out we can run on fat and not even use carbs at all. Okay. And so carbs, if you Google ketogenic diets, we're going to talk about fats next week, but basically we have a lot of fat. And so if there's a point, like I told you about that guy who basically fasted for over a year, he wasn't eating carbs and he was running on fat, and he wasn't eating up his protein either. It's crazy. So yes, they are a great source of energy, but if you decide to do a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet, we don't need to run on carbs. When I do fasting, intermittent fasting, and for you guys, anyone who read the articles on intermittent fasting, they're on CM Connect. Every day I pretty much burn fat because I don't eat for 15, 16 hours a day. Okay, I typically stop eating around 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then I eat again the next day at 12 to 1. Okay, and so I don't perish. I actually work out. I'm fine. And when I'm working out, I'm not running on carbs, maybe a little bit of glycogen. More often than not, I'm probably running on stored fat. Okay, so there's two. So besides energy, what are some other functions of carbs? Everyone says carbs are energy, but what else does carbs do? Well, carbs are very satiating. That means they make you feel full. Proteins are also satiating, by the way. Carbs have fiber, so fiber helps you go to the bathroom. It's good for colon health. It decreases transit time, which is how long it takes food to go from your mouth to your anus. Fiber's also been we're going to look at fiber, been lower rates of certain cancers, pretty beneficial. Carbohydrates often have B vitamins, and B vitamins are a really important. Meats also have B vitamins, but B vitamins are really important for producing neurotransmitters. So things like serotonin, dopamine. All right. So there are some functions of carbs beyond energy. Everyone always just thinks energy, and there's actually other reasons to eat carbs. Most Americans consume large amounts of simple carbs in their diet. Do you remember how many pounds of sugar I said the average American eats? Who remembers? 150 pounds. Remember I said that wasn't gummy bears. That was the sugar that's in bread and pasta, pancakes, waffles. All right? So carbs can either be simple, complex, and actually I always like to say that there's actually a third class which is called refined or processed. But we'll look at simple. Simple just means that they are a more simple molecule. The most basic simple sugars are glucose and fructose. Fructose is fruit sugar. Glucose is what our body wants to run on. Our body doesn't love running on fructose. If you heard of high fructose corn syrup, when our body gets fructose, it gets confused because we weren't supposed to get that much fructose in the diet. So often high fructose consumption actually gets stored around the liver as fat. If you look up fatty liver disease, you'll see that, lots of young people, a lot of you guys in this class, what'll happen is somebody will get a car accident, they go to the ER, and then when they're, looking at their abdomen, they'll be like, oh my God, they've got fatty liver disease, and they don't drink alcohol. It's because they've been drinking soda, drinking energy drinks, drinking juice, and all that fructose, besides making you fat on the outside, also encases your liver in fat. Glucose, though, we want glucose. That's what our body runs on. If I stick two simple sugars, two monosaccharides together, I get a disaccharide. Lactose, maltose, and then sucrose, which is table sugar, are the three most common disaccharides. When I eat a disaccharide in the body, it just breaks it down. So lactose is broken down into glucose. All of them are broken down into glucose eventually, or glucose and fructose, etc. And then, as I said, you should know what a refined carbohydrate. Refined carbohydrate is also processed. All that is they take something and they break it down into flour. So that's got no more health benefits, no more fiber. All that's left is the sugar. And sugar is in everything, guys. Okay? If you ever get a chance, great documentary on Amazon. It's called That Sugar Film. I usually play it during my on-ground class, because we have a little bit more time. But that video is amazing because the guy he's an Australian, and he basically did an experiment like Super Size Me, but he did want to do this guy never ate sugar. He was a healthy guy, married, had a baby on the way, and he decided to eat what the average Australian ate a day, which I think was 40 teaspoons of sugar a day, which is actually less than the average American eats a day. Okay. And by the way, remember, if I didn't say this before, if you want to know how much sugar something has, all you do is divide the amount by 4. Okay, so a Mountain Dew has around 72 grams of sugar. If I want to know how many teaspoons that is, I divide that by 4. 70 divided by 4 is roughly 15 is 60. So that's 17 teaspoons of sugar. So ask yourself, if you're like, oh, I like my Mountain Dew. If I was to put 17 teaspoons of sugar in a glass, would you drink that glass of sugar? And most people would not. And so what this guy did in this movie, which was really interesting, is that he also did not want to eat any junk food. He wanted to eat what was called supposedly health food. So his diet was healthy cereals. It was oatmeal. It was yogurt. All these things that have frozen yogurt that people eat because they think they're eating healthy. And he was eating these with all these hidden sugars. And what happened is that basically he got fatty liver disease. And this was only in, I think it was in 2 months. He got depressed. He gained a bunch of belly fat. His moods were everywhere. It was crazy, So great video, That Sugar Film, it's called. I can look it up, actually. A lot of fun movie to see. It's on Amazon. You can watch it for free if you're an Amazon Prime member. Here's the trailer, actually.
Sugar is now found in 80% of the foods we eat, but with the constant confusion over its effects on our health, and with this little person on the way, I feel like I need some definitive answers.
The point is to test out a very high sugar diet.
How are you going to do that?
If you want to match averages, 40 teaspoons of sugar a day. 40 a day.
But they must be hidden sugars, found in commonly perceived healthy foods and drinks. So no soft drink, confectionery or ice cream.
People on this planet are growing sicker every day. And many scientists now believe that fructose has a role to play.
I'm eating the same amount of calories as I did before, and I'm not feeling full. These calories do dramatically different things in the human body.
If I kept going for these levels, would I be knocking on the door of obesity?
Definitely. You haven't got far to go.
Any sugar, brown sugar, white sugar, fruit juice concentrate from fruit juice, equal effect on your health.
Not feeling very well at all today. My fuse is a lot shorter.
Your mental function is just unstable.
You've got the signs of a fatty liver. This is the first time I've seen that it can be developed in 2 or 3 weeks.
Whenever you walk into a supermarket, make an immediate turn for the produce aisle and avoid everything in the middle.
Sugar's not evil, but life is so much better when you get rid of it.
I actually think you can watch it free here on YouTube. Somebody's pirated it, but it's definitely worth the watch, especially with a family, kids. If you got kids, you should really watch it just because, I don't think I've said this before, but, anyone here who listens to this lecture, realize that your kids, so the generation of kids being born right now is the first generation to expected to have a lower life expectancy than their parents. Which blows me away. One of the reasons I do what I do is because I hope that, a little bit of what I learn can kind of trickle down to these families. But, sugar's found in ketchup, barbecue sauce, flavored creamers. It's everywhere. Soy sauce has got sugar in it, It's always surprising. Salad dressings often have sugar. If something's fat-free, they usually replace the fat with sugar. Okay? All right. That video wasn't that great. All right. Complex carbs. So complex carbs are a little better provided they're not processed carbs. These are usually multiple chains of monosaccharides bound together. It becomes a polysaccharide. Some of the ones you might have heard of are starch, fiber, and in the body there's this stuff called glycogen. Glycogen is our body's stored sugar. So we store sugar like in these little branches. And I do ask you on the homework, where do we store it? And it should it's interesting if you're into physiology. We store our extra sugar, the sugar that we don't use right away, in our muscles and in our liver. And it makes sense because if you're ever in fight or flight where you need to run really quick, you want that sugar to be in your muscles to get you going. And then your liver, when you aren't eating all night, the reason that your blood sugar doesn't drop too much is because your liver can release some of that sugar and keep our blood sugar relatively level. Okay? Starches are what are in, sweet potatoes, pasta, brown rice, corn, potatoes, and I already mentioned glycogen. So of the carbs, if you have to eat carbs, the ones that are most important are the fiber. Okay, so fiber is the indigestible portion of a plant food that helps move food through the digestive system, delays the absorption of cholesterol and other nutrients, softens stools by absorbing water. It's found in fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains. And so we classify fiber as either soluble or insoluble. So soluble just means that it can dissolve in water. It's like a gel. So flax seeds are a good source. Certain fruits, I think, are a good source of soluble fiber. Citrus fruits, dried beans. The insoluble basically comes in and goes out relatively the same. So corn, the shell of corn is insoluble. Bran. So why should you eat something that you don't get anything out of? Because it makes you feel satiated. And it moves through the digestive system, so it decreases the chance of constipation. So fiber is really good. I mean, I list, I usually have the day class. This is one of always their test questions. List 3 or 4 functions of fiber. Everyone always says fiber is good for constipation, which is true, but fiber is also very satiating. I mean, it makes you feel full for a long time. Fiber binds onto fat and cholesterol when you eat it, and then you excrete some of that fat and cholesterol. So that's really good. It's good for heart disease. It's good for blood sugar levels because your blood sugar doesn't spike as much when you eat fiber because it takes so long to break down. It's good for protecting against obesity because of the satiation and the blood sugar regulation. It helps decreasing diabetes. It has been linked to lower rates of colorectal cancer and also diverticulitis. If you're not familiar what diverticulitis is a disease that, a high amount of people get in their 40s. And what it is you get these outpouchings in your colon. So this is what your colon looks like. And you get these little pockets. And these pockets are because of the lack of fiber. So what happens is these pockets fill up with fecal material and they get inflamed. And if they explode, it's just like appendicitis. And they're really, really painful. You can have diverticulosis when they're not full of fecal material. And then when they're inflamed, they're called diverticulitis. But if this explodes, now all the fecal material goes in the blood. And I have that blood poisoning and you could actually die. And why is fiber linked to this, guys? Because people should go to the bathroom. We haven't talked about this, but maybe we have. But I really think that, how do you define constipation? I think the average person should go to the bathroom 1 to 2. We're talking number 2 here. Should go to the bathroom 1 to 2 times a day. Okay. If you're not going 1 to 2 times a day, let's say you're going every other day, every third day, the food is sitting in your colon. And so it's not moving across, so it starts to press on the walls. So you do this month after month, year after year, and the walls start to get weakened, and then you get these outpouchings. Fiber allows the food to go through really fast, and you go to the bathroom. Okay, really fast and go to the bathroom. So that's why fiber is really good. How much fiber should we eat? What's the recommended daily amount? Well, how much do you think the average person eats right now? Average person eats 9 to 15 grams a day. You know what they should be eating? 25 to 38 grams a day. Big difference. And I'm going to have you guys do a carb assessment. That'll be the last thing we talk about here is some homework for this week. You're going to actually have to look at your carbs, your sugar, and your fiber consumption for 2 days and write it all down. It's kind of a fun homework. There was this guy, Weston Price, and he traveled all over the world. This was in the early 1900s. He decided to study. He's like, why do we always study diseased persons? Why don't we study healthy people? So he looked at all these tribes of people that weren't eating what we eat. They were non-westernized societies. And he found the average fiber consumption was probably 60 to 70 grams a day. And that's a lot of fiber. And by the way, fiber, if you start upping your fiber, do it gradually because, number one, fiber likes to suck up water. So if you add more fiber, you need to drink more water or it becomes like a dried sponge in your colon. But these people Weston Price saw that were eating 60, 70 grams of fiber a day, they weren't obese, they didn't have diabetes, didn't have heart disease, nor cancer. Now, they also didn't have our technology. They moved a ton. So there are other factors, but it's always something to think about. All right, so we're going to watch a quick little video about whole grains. And then, there's two really good videos I like. This first one is on grain labels.
It is one of the hottest trends at the supermarket, the surge of products from cereals to snacks to pastas with labels boasting they are whole grain to convince you they are a smart and healthy choice. But are they really all that different? Can you trust what's on the label? The Center for Science and the Public Interest has been investigating, and tomorrow they'll go straight to the FDA with these findings. Here's ABC's Elizabeth Leamy.
Multigrain, whole grain, whole wheat. Tomorrow, the Center for Science and the Public Interest will demand that the FDA define those terms because right now they have no legal meaning. That's right. By law, whole wheat bread must be made with 100% whole wheat flour. But any other wheat product could be made with this much white flour and this little wheat and still be labeled whole wheat. Same goes for whole grain. Take this old London Melba toast.
There's actually twice as much white flour as whole wheat flour in this product.
These Eggo waffles say made with whole grain, but contain more white flour than whole wheat. And Jacobson says you can't tell by the beige color either. Consider these Lance crackers.
They had caramel coloring.
Multigrain, also undefined.
The only thing it means is that it has more than one grain. It doesn't mean that any of them are healthful.
Some products brag that they have at least 8 grams of whole grain per serving, but serving sizes vary, so some advocates say that can be misleading.
This is about the amount of in a serving of pasta. So to have 8 grams is just this little tiny amount. It's about 1/7 whole grain.
The FDA has been promising to define whole grain since 1993, but when we contacted the companies, some said they follow the existing FDA guidelines, such as they are. Others said they continue to look for opportunities to add whole grain. So how can you choose wisely? Nutritionists say if the package boasts whole grain, double-check the ingredient list and make sure whole wheat or another whole grain comes first. Because even if you see the term whole grain, you still have to read the whole label. Elizabeth Leamy, ABC News, Washington.
All right. So I'm going to back up for a second. I kind of jumped ahead. So whole grain, so we should look, what is a whole grain? And this is one of my favorite slides. You can see this online too. So this is an actual whole grain, like this is a wheat. And so when you get a whole grain is actually made of 3 parts. The outside is called the bran. That's got the fiber, the B vitamins, the phytochemicals, the minerals. Phytochemicals are basically like plant vitamins. There's a little bit of fat, and that's called the germ. Your grandparents or even your parents might eat this stuff called a wheat germ. That's where we have the vitamin E, the healthy fats, antioxidants, more phytochemicals, minerals, and B vitamins. And then the third part of the grain is the endosperm. The endosperm is basically the sugar. Okay, there's a little bit of starch, there's a little bit of protein, some B vitamins. So a whole grain should have all 3 parts of this. Okay, all 3 parts of this. Now, we're like in a frenzy where everything is labeled whole grain. And I think I list this as a homework question, but just because it says there's whole grain, I've seen whole grain Lucky Charms, whole grain Pop-Tarts. Does that mean it's good for you? Hopefully if you're listening to this video and you watch this far, you know that the answer is no, okay? And why it's not good for you guys is because the government has such lenient labeling standards that, and this has been going on, when I was in undergraduate, it was 1992 to 1996. I remember it was like 1993. I was into nutrition. I went out and I'm like, I'm going to go get the healthiest bread I can find. So I went out and I bought a 12 grain Arnold's bread. And this was before everything's were even labeled whole grain. It was just a 12 grain. So I figured this stuff's great. It had little seeds on the outside. It was dark brown. So I bring it home. I'm all excited. And then I read the label. And the first ingredient's flour. Second ingredient is sugar. And then way at the bottom of the ingredients list, it says may contain 2% or less of the following. And there were like 8 or 9 of my whole grains. And that's been going on now. What? That's 19... almost 30 years. Almost 30 years, okay? So the government is really, really tricky. And so when you see things that say whole grain, it doesn't mean a lot. And so people, like that video is a few years old, so now people said, we want to know, like, labeled things and what's really healthy. And so now the government says, okay, well, you can call things 100% whole grain. 100% whole grain. But did you know when you see something that's 100% whole grain, the government actually said that as long as it's 51%, then it's considered okay to call it 100% whole grain. So to me, that's really frustrating. And that's part of why I teach this class, is because I feel like, unless you do the research, you're never going to know. And you're going to try to eat things that are healthy. And you're not, because even the government is having a hard time labeling what's healthy. And there's a whole debate, why is this? And there's so much in regards to influence in the government from the different big companies, the wheat industry, lobbyists, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I do want you to know this number. So this is another homework question. 100% whole grain is actually 51% whole grain, which is frustrating. One more video. I actually skipped over this video on fiber, and then we're going to talk about the story of bread.
According to a new study published in the Archives of Internal Medicine, eating more dietary fiber may be associated with a reduced risk of death from any cause, including heart disease as well as infectious and respiratory diseases. Now, this news has nutritionists cheering, since upping your fiber intake is safe, easy, and offers other health benefits. Here to tell us more about the study and how to use fiber to our advantage is our resident food coach and registered dietitian, Cynthia Sass.
Hello.
Cynthia, great to see you.
You too, thank you.
So tell us a little bit more about this study.
Very interesting study. So it was done by the National Cancer Institute. It had 350,000 people that were tracked for 9 years. And what they did was, over that 9-year period, they kept track of what they ate. And they also looked at who passed away during that time and what the cause of death was. And what they found was that people who had the highest fiber intake, which was about 30 grams a day for men and about 25 grams a day for women, had a 22% lower risk of dying from any cause.
Interesting.
In that 9-year period.
So this was a pretty extensive study.
Yes, it was. And they also found that when you really looked at specific types of disease, like cardiovascular disease or respiratory diseases, then the higher fiber intake compared to the lowest, that the reduced risk was as much as 50% or greater. So this fiber is very protective, and the study found that specifically fiber from whole grains made the most impact.
Interesting. And so the magic numbers are 30 grams a day for men and 25 for women?
Yes. Now, the average intake in the United States is about 15 grams, so we're falling short of that. Now, when they looked at the highest level of intake of fiber versus the lowest levels in this study were 13 grams a day for men and 10 grams a day for women. So they were below the average in the United States. So clearly, by at least doubling the average fiber intake, we can get up to this protective level that was found in this study. And fortunately, it's easy and delicious to do that.
Fantastic. We're going to talk about that, because we want to know what 30 grams of fiber a day looks like, right? And you're going to show us. Starting out with breakfast is a great way to get some fiber into our
Absolutely. Some of the very easiest ways to do it are to swap out refined grains for whole grains. In this country, we eat far too many refined grains, the white breads and the sugary cereals. Just by swapping in oatmeal for that sugary cereal is one of the best ways. Now, there's more than one type of fiber. We have soluble fiber and we have insoluble fiber, and they're both very important. This study really didn't look at the differences between, it really just looked at the total grams. But soluble fiber is a soft, sticky kind that's found in oatmeal, and it's also found in bananas and the inside of soft, sticky fruits. That's the kind that really tends to grab onto cholesterol, preventing it from being absorbed or reabsorbed into the blood. So that's the type that's going to help lower your total cholesterol, which is why it may be related to this reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. Then we have the insoluble type, which is the found that's found in things like the wheat bran, in the stalk of broccoli. It tends to be the harder, really chewy
Yes.
type of fiber, and that's the type that really tends to have more of an effect on digestive health and really strengthening the muscles of the digestive tract, keeping them nice and strong and healthy.
So we need both
We
soluble
do.
and insoluble.
I actually
We should
have
mix
just
it
a
up.
few foods here that add up to 26 grams of fiber, and it doesn't even come close to representing a whole
Wow.
day's worth of food.
So this is the minimum amount for a woman to see those benefits, according to the study.
That's right. And actually, the daily value, which when you look at a food label, you'll see percent daily value, and that basically means how much fiber or any nutrient really a serving of that food has compared to what we want people to have for the day. Now, the daily value for fiber is 25 grams a day, and they sort of use that number because we have to average out men, women, children,
Right.
everyone.
Right.
So 25 at least is the magic number, and then men, it's usually a little higher because men need more calories a day than women.
Right.
And so we kind of say 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories is what we need. But to keep it simple, go for 25 or more.
Right, and
okay?
here you have, this is what it looks like if you want a visual of what 25 grams of fiber looks like, and it looks delicious.
Yes, a very small serving you can see of
Mhm.
cooked oats. If you want to add a little bit more water to that or some non-fat milk, you could stretch the portion a little bit, but with a cup of raspberries. Raspberries
Beautiful.
are one of the highest fiber fruits, so when you're thinking about fruit, you want to look for fruit that either has edible seeds like raspberries or membranes or an edible skin. So for example, one serving, a quarter of a whole cantaloupe only has 1 gram of fiber. A serving of raspberries, 1 cup, 8 grams of fiber.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah,
Incredible.
Then I have here just some lentil soup, or it could be black bean soup. 1 cup of lentils or beans can have 15 to 16 grams of fiber just in that one serving there.
Look at that.
An orange, this is about 7 grams here, and then this is just an ounce of almonds. Anything that you think of having fibrous or chewy parts of it is going to add to your fiber intake. So
The
all of
skin,
just
is it the
this.
skin on the almond that does it? Or
It's both the
it's
skin
both?
and the inside.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And the orange is a great way of starting out your day. Instead of the glass of orange juice, opt for the orange itself,
That's right. You get the same nutrients, but you get the additional fiber that you don't get in the juice. And if you're going to put this in your kid's lunch, if you can, try to peel it, section it, and take the seeds out, because we see in the studies, and it just kind of anecdotally with people, that if you leave it like that, they won't eat it.
Right.
But if you go ahead and kind of prepare it
Do
for
the work for them,
that's right.
then they're more likely to put it in their mouths. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Cynthia Sass.
Thank you.
You know, who knew fiber could be so delicious and easy to fit into our diet?
And
Thank you so
protective.
And protective, that's right. All right, you can follow ABC News Now on Facebook and Twitter just by searching ABC News Now.
All right. So those are both pretty good videos, actually. So the last thing we're going to talk about is talked about whole grains. I want to talk a little bit about bread. The story of bread. So bread is interesting. You know, bread about 100 years ago, 1900s. If you were to get a loaf of bread, it would have been small. It would have been hard. It would have been dark brown. It would have been heavy. And the reason is because we didn't have the mills that we have now. And so the way we would take grain, a whole grain like this, if I wanted to make it into bread, is I would basically get stones, like a pestle and mortar, which is basically a rock stick and a rock bowl, and I would just mush up the grain as best I can with my hand. And then I wouldn't really destroy this very much. And then I would add water and yeast and make bread. And so the bread was dark brown, it was heavy, it was dense, it filled you up. So that was how we would, that's how bread was initially. And so what happened is that as the 20th century moved along, the 19th century, we started inventing mills. And so we started milling bread, and, the first mills, the bread was still okay, but then people wanted more and more refined bread. And so as we milled the bread, this whole grain became flour, and as the mills got better, the bran got so smashed up, it basically was non-existent. The germ disappeared, and so what was left? The endosperm, the sugar. So bread became so, white bread happened in like the 1950s. And basically, wealthy people used to eat white bread first. It's funny because now we feed white bread to poor people. And, it's cheap. But the original people who used to eat white bread were the wealthiest, and then they were giving it to their kids, and their kids all got vitamin deficiencies, so they started making enriched bread. And so that's why if you see enriched bread, all these vitamins fell out of the bread, so they sprinkle them back on the bread. And that's what enriched bread is. And so then like the 1980s, 1990s, people said, oh, we got to eat healthier. So they started eating wheat bread. And then 12 grain bread, stone ground bread. And basically wheat bread is just colored white bread. Okay, it's not really any better. And that's where it's just frustrating. There's potato bread, there's, whole wheat, stone ground wheat. If any of those say flour, basically the bread is no better than white bread. So what is a healthy bread? And this is a question on your homework. Basically now I tell people that you should look for either 100% whole grain. That's a healthy bread. Because even though it's 51%, it's still better than nothing. Or a high fiber bread. And high fiber bread is at least 3 grams or more of fiber per slice. Or sprouted bread. And sprouted bread basically means that they take the grains and the seeds and they sprout them in water and then they mush them up and they make bread out of them. One of my favorite breads is this stuff called Ezekiel bread. Ezekiel bread is, the name is a little odd. It's a religious thing. But Ezekiel bread, why I like it is because if you look at the label, Ezekiel bread label, what you'll notice is there's no flour. Look, it's got sprouted wheat, then water. So this is, when you're reading a label, the first ingredient is what it has the most of. Then it's got barley, then millet, then lentils, then soybeans, then spelt. So notice there's no sugar, okay? There's no flour, all right? So this bread isn't great for sandwiches because it doesn't have all the crap in it to make it nice and fluffy, but it's fantastic as toast. I typically buy this and freeze it, and then I eat it. I'll eat it as like on a tuna fish on a toasted sandwich, or I'll eat it with, if I have like peanut butter, I'll have it on toast, so. But much healthier bread. So any of those 3 options are a good option for bread. So we went through that. Last couple things I want to talk about is this thing called the glycemic index. So you might have heard about this. You see commercials for it. The glycemic index is a rating system of carbohydrates. So what that means is that basically they, in the last probably 10 years, we realized that not all carbs are the same. And so carbs can be rated on how fast they break down into sugar. The higher the number, so it goes up to 100, 0 to 100, the worse the carb is, because if it breaks down fast, it's, like the fastest thing is dried fruit, like a date is 100. But French bread is a 95, okay? Mashed potatoes, baked potato, high 80s. Now, if you love potatoes, there's always that one student who eats whole potatoes. A whole potato is fine. I've got to cook a potato for an hour to bake it, or boil it for half hour to mash it. So that's basically like digesting it. So when you eat a high glycemic carb, what happens is that your sugar spikes up, and then your insulin spikes up too. And so what happens is that about 2 hours later, you're craving more sugar, or you're getting withdrawals because you had this high amount of insulin. And so this insulin's really good at what you do. So you eat the sugar, you get this big spike, you get this big spike of insulin, which you're not supposed to have spikes of insulin. Insulin shuttles all that glucose to the cells, but then insulin's so good at what it does that our glucose levels drop below what they're supposed to be. Normally glucose levels are supposed to be about 70 to 100. So you have this thing called hypoglycemia, or low blood sugar. That's about 1.5, 2 hours after a meal. And think about how you feel after a big lunch. You feel sleepy, you feel tired, you feel aggravated. And so what do? We drink caffeine, or we eat more sugar. And so ideally, you want to eat foods that are, usually I see a rating of 60 or below. That's considered low glycemic. In this chart, it's medium glycemic, but 60 or below. And so those foods will break down slower. So like I think Slim Fast or one of those big companies, they're doing all their foods are glycemic based now or something like that. I think it's useful, but as I ask you in the homework, what's the flaw with the glycemic index? Well, there's a couple flaws. The first one is we don't eat foods by themselves. Okay, we don't eat foods by themselves. What I mean is that if I'm going to have bread, I typically have bread with peanut butter, bread with butter. If I eat pasta, I have it with spaghetti sauce and meatballs. And so the other foods, the fats and the proteins, decrease the insulin response. Okay, that's a big flaw because we don't really eat these foods alone. We usually eat them with stuff. I mean, sometimes maybe you'll have some dates, but for the most part. So these glycemic index was done in a lab. The other problem with the glycemic index is that it doesn't factor in how much carb is in each thing. So what I mean is watermelon. Look at watermelon. Watermelon is considered a high glycemic food. It's 72. If you've ever had watermelon, they call it watermelon because it's something like 95% water. So would I ever consider watermelon bad for you? And do you think anyone has ever gotten obese eating watermelon? No, neither. So to fix this, they created this thing called the glycemic load. Glycemic load is where we factor in not only how much the glycemic index, but how much sugar. Okay, so watermelon, which is a high glycemic index, has a low glycemic load, so it would be considered okay to eat. All right, and so that's the glycemic index and the glycemic load. And I bring those up because they're on the homework. Two other things about carbs. I know this lecture is a little long, but I hope it's kind of interesting. The first one is, when do you think is the best time that you should eat carbs? Because I don't want to tell you that I'm anti-carb. I'm not, okay? I find that most people overeat carbs, but, when should you eat them? When's the best times? Best times are typically first thing in the morning if you're not fasting. Because you've been fasting, so breakfast is a good time to eat carbs because you've been running on, stored sugar and fat all night. And then when do you think the second best time to eat carbs is? The second best time to eat carbs is actually after a workout. After a workout, your muscles are literally like glucose vacuum cleaners. They just suck up sugar. So it's a great time to eat glucose. Okay? The last thing I want to say, and then I'll go over the homework, is they ask, and this is also all the questions I think I'm talking about will probably be on your homework questions. They asked a bunch of experts. They said, what do you think would be, if you could give people one piece of dietary advice that could impact their health dramatically, what would it be? And again, and I agree with this advice, is that most people should probably shoot to lower their typical carb intake down, when its average person eats about 200 to 250 grams of carbs, to 100 grams or less. 100 grams or less. Okay, and so that is a question. So I'm going to have you do a homework, and this is what the homework looks like. It's going to be under the coursework. You're going to do a carb assessment. So if you've been paying attention, you can answer a lot of these by just listening to the lecture. Define what's the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber. List 5 reasons to be consuming fiber. Now this is key. Pick 2 days and record how much carbs, sugar, and fiber you consume for each day. Write your daily diet for 2 days on the back of this page. I will not grade this homework if you ignore this one line. You need to write your daily diet. So you're going to pick 2 days and you're going to count the carbs, the sugars, and the fiber. If you have a smartphone, there's lots of good apps for that. The best one is MyFitnessPal, has all the foods in it. If you don't want to do MyFitnessPal, there's also online, there's calorieking.com. It's a free website that you can look up foods, calorieking.com. But I want you to break those down. But if you don't write down your daily diet and you just throw down a couple things, and I'm going to say you didn't put any effort in the homework, I'm not going to grade it. What are 2 things to look for in a healthy bread? As I said, sprouted, 100% whole grain, and high fiber. What is the glycemic index? Why is it useful? What is the one flaw? We just went over that. And then last question, what should we eat after exercise in regards to carbs and protein? You should actually eat, this is interesting, this is the one time where you should actually, the researchers pretty much agree that you should eat a high glycemic carb, okay, because you want an insulin spike, because insulin, one of the cool things about insulin is it will help shuttle some of the protein with it into the muscles. So this is why some people do chocolate milk after they work out, but a high glycemic carb and a protein is the answer for that. So that is it. Thank you for listening. Next week we will continue on this lecture. Hope you actually, whoops, there's one more thing. Sorry, this lecture is going to go a little long. I just realized there's one more thing I got to do. The last thing I'm going to do is what's called a portion distortion quiz. Psyched you out. Portion distortion quiz. This will just take 5 more minutes. So this is something the government puts out because one of the thoughts about why people have gotten overweight is because portions have changed. So I love this little quiz. It's pretty fun to see how much portions have changed in the last 20 years. So here's a bagel 20 years ago, 140 calories. Today, how many calories do you think a bagel is? 350 calories. Okay, and I remember when bagels were that small. So there's a difference of 210 calories. How long would it take you to rake leaves in order to burn that extra 210 calories? And this is based on a 130-pound person. You'd have to rake leaves for 50 minutes to burn those extra 210 calories. Cheeseburger. Okay, 20 years ago it was 333 calories. How many do you think it is now? 257 calories. 257 calories. Isn't that crazy? How long would it take you to lift weights to burn an extra 250 calories based on a 130-pound person? An hour and 30 minutes extra. All right, and so start thinking about this. A lot of people eat the same foods since they were kids, and they're like, why am I gaining weight? Now, our metabolism slows because we lose muscle mass, we're getting older, but also food has gotten bigger. Spaghetti and meatballs then in a restaurant, and now, how many calories do you think are in this? This one's pretty surprising. 500 calories, 1,000 calories in a restaurant. Think about some of the big Italian restaurants around here and how much their big portions are. How long would it take you to house clean to burn an extra 500 calories based on a 130-pound person? 2 hours and 35 minutes. That's a lot of time just to have that extra pasta. French fries. 20 years ago, 200 calories. How many calories in today's portion? 600. 400 calorie difference. How long would it take you to walk leisurely to burn extra 400 calories? So walking actually burns some calories. I think it's about an hour. Extra hour. Soda. Okay, 20 years ago we had these little skinny bottles. Now everyone's walking around with this 20-ounce bottle. 250 calories to 85 calories. 165 calorie difference. How long would it take you to work in the garden to burn those extra calories? Now this is if you're working pretty hard. 35 minutes. This guy's raking or hoeing or something. Turkey sandwich. This is one of my favorite ones. Okay, 20 years ago, 320 calories. This is probably not the 500 calories at Subway, so this is like at a deli. 820. 500 calorie difference. How long would it take you to ride a bike? Now remember, riding a bike is non-weight bearing, so you don't burn as many calories as walking. You'd have to ride a bike for an hour and 25 minutes to burn 500 calories. And that is the portion distortion quiz. So now we're done. Okay, that only took like 3 more minutes. All right. Have a great day. Do the homework, do the forums, and hope you enjoyed the nutrition lecture.